Om Sahana Vavatu Sahanau Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu Ma Vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. So we continue our class on Vedanta and the science of human possibilities. In the last talk, we discussed how the position of the materialists or the Charvakas or even the other materialists who do not believe in the existence of pure consciousness or the spirit, they maintain that the body itself gives rise to consciousness and it originates from bodily processes. So we saw how it is not tenable, but we will just see what Shankaracharya has to say. Shankaracharya says that it is not possible. He refuted the idea that the body possesses consciousness because it is not in its intrinsic quality of a matter. Suppose there is some matter or there is anything gross. So consciousness cannot be its intrinsic quality. Like, for example, we see as long as the body lasts, the consciousness will be there in a physical body. If the consciousness were to be in the body, and with the destruction of the body, the consciousness would have gone. So then again, the other forms of properties of the body like form, size, and others are perceived by others. They are perceived by others. They can see it's a common property that our body is moving, our body is, its size is growing or it is moving, and all those things. If that were to be consciousness, it can be perceived by others, whereas there are certain aspects of our consciousness, like our own will, our own memory, which cannot be seen by others. So it's known only to us. So what is that will, that memory, and that individuality or the ego which a human being or a so-called conscious being exhibits? Where does that originate from? If others can see, they should also be able to see, just as they see our motion, the form, the shape, the size, and also the other factors, like whether the body is active or it is dull. They can see it, but they cannot know. They cannot even anticipate what our will is. Though there are people who say through clairvoyance or maybe through, they can hear certain sounds, subtle sounds, or the subtle thoughts. But still, one's own will, one's own ego is one's own. It cannot be said that it is part of the body. So it cannot be classed with the characteristics of the physical body, gross. So then one may ask the question, that is how the people who believe in the spirit argue. They say, what is the exact nature of consciousness that is imagined by the materialists? Because if you say consciousness belongs to the body, then you have to define. Everything has to have a definition. And what it cannot be other than material, because Charvakas, they say only material and physical existence and its modifications exist. They say we don't need to know about the other things like consciousness. What is what appears before us is only important. What does not appear, what is behind this appearance? But then that will leave several questions unanswered. If consciousness was inherent in the body, it cannot objectify the body. That is, a thing cannot operate on itself. For example, fire heat, that is, they call it the characteristics of the fire, cannot consume the fire itself. Or even a most expert dancer cannot climb his own shoulder. Can you imagine a person trying to climb his own shoulders? So if it is that is there is something different than the pure characteristic of a gross existence that defines consciousness. So it does not originate from the body nor from the mind. We'll see. The intrinsic self is the knower of everything. It is the knower of our mental states. It is the knower of our body, the knower of our bodily functions. It can feel, it can know. So there is something which is other than the body and its functions. The body and its functions are the Annamaya Kosha, the Pranamaya Kosha, the Manomaya Kosha. There are different levels of existence. They may be, some may be gross, some may be subtle, but anyway, they can be felt or they can be perceived by this consciousness uniformly. You can't say it is one person who says my mind. It will be the same person who says it is my mind, my body, so that identification of me and mine, that ego, that will, that I will do this, I will do that, or my body will do this, my mind thinks like this. So there is that unifying factor, that factor which integrates all our experiences, subtle, causal, or even the dream existence, and even the sleep, which is the nature of our causal body. The causal body is what remains active when you are sleeping. That is why when Shankaracharya and others, the people who support the idea that the spirit is or consciousness is independent of the body, they say, why does the causal body remember? Why does the individual remember that he had good sleep? Who was the person who was active during the sleep? So that's the causal body, which it is the causal body which definitely believes, or the causal body which is active during sleep. So the plain truth is that insentient material elements, however complicated or however complex they may be. For example, the Western science tries to make the difference between a sentient material or an insentient material, like stone, whereas there are some sentient beings like plants, animals, human beings. They try to make this difference, that there is consciousness in the living things, and it's an intrinsic property of the living beings. But as we discussed, what happens when the thing dies? How does a conscious being suddenly lose consciousness? Where does that consciousness go? So all these questions, like flame of an oil lamp, it's not like the oil lamp was dull, then you light a flame and then it glows. That is light, that is not consciousness. It does not have the self-luminosity. The fire is something external. It will be there as long as it is there. The fire does not know it is glowing. Neither it has, it's not aware of itself. This self-awareness is a unique property of the pure consciousness, as against the other so-called sentience or consciousness. According to the scientist, anything that moves, anything that acts in a particular way, that can regenerate, that can create, that can destroy, is said to be conscious. So no material product, however refined or resplendent, can lose its materiality or unconsciousness. So devoid of consciousness, it can by no means cognize anything. It can only be the object of cognition. So, and never be the subject. So that pure awareness, self-awareness, or that subjective nature of any object or any material object is missing, in that it is not intrinsic, it is always separate. The source of consciousness must be something other than the bodily process. That is how they come to the conclusion. The Upanishads also have a verse which supports this idea. The Atman, they call it the Atman, for want of a better name, they call it Atman. The Atman means that which is aware of its own self, which no matter what the process like fire and other things, which appear to be illuminating, or it illumines other things, but doesn't, there is no self-awareness in that. So this Atman, which is the luminous self, luminous not in the sense of light, but it is the one who cognizes the psychophysical organism that we call the body or the mind or even the causal body. So its nature is ever the subject, and it can never be the object. It cannot be an object and subject at the same time. The subject always has to see or be aware of the object, not vice versa. The object is not aware of the subject. The subject is aware of the object. So Brihadaranyaka Upanishad says, Adrishto drishta, Ashruta shrota, Amato manta, Avignato vignata. Means that is how indirectly the spirit is described. You may say it is a characteristic of the spirit. Now we are slowly, before we discuss the causal body, the subtle body and the causal body, we are trying to prove how this gross body has nothing to do with the spirit. Then we'll show how the subtle body also has nothing to do with the spirit. It is the eternal subject which sees the gross body, which perceives the subtle body, or which even is aware of the causal body during deep sleep. So the three states are excellent examples where we can seek very clearly that we are aware of the physical body in the waking state. The dream state will give rise to the subtle body. We are aware of the subtle body in our dream state, and in the causal body where even the dreams stop, where we are not aware of the dream objects, the dream world. Only that feeling of eternal peace is there, deep sleep. It's the most enjoyable feeling of joy. That's why they say when you get up, you say, oh, I had a wonderful sleep. So if nobody was observing, nobody was experiencing that state, how could you say that you had deep sleep? A person who doesn't have deep sleep says, I had a very disturbed sleep. That means he didn't be in, the self-aware Atman was not totally reflected in the causal state. It was changing its identification from the gross body, that is, he might have woken up when he was having some nightmare or very strong dream, or he must be spending most of the time in the dream, but the dream objects, the dream world was keeping him engaged. So that makes him tired. That makes him tired because he gets up several times. So only when he gets deep sleep, when the Atman says, when the Atman is able to forget or its connection with the gross for the time being and rest peacefully in the causal body. Causal body, as you know, is the body which is free from the coloring of the gross body and also the dream body or the subtle body. It is something which where there is very less transformation, very less change, and that is why because the samskaras or the you may say the things which are there, they are in a very potential or a dormant state. They are not bubbling up. The thoughts, there may be a lot of samskaras which are potential thoughts or potential actions even, but they are hidden. They are totally subdued in the causal state. So that is why we don't know. We can try to judge the nature of somebody's mind. We can even judge his actions because we can see them. But it is very difficult to know what the samskaras are. We discussed this several times. Only incarnations who can pass through the triple layer of the psychophysical organism, which is the body, can understand the nature of that subtle or that causal body. So otherwise, the causal body is definitely a much peaceful part of our psychophysical organism, which identifying with which we feel at peace. That is why we desperately want some kind of deep sleep in the midst of our waking state, in the midst of our dream state, and in the midst of that, even moments of deep sleep where you forget the restlessness of the body, anything that makes it stable and brings it nearer, being nearest to the Atman, the self-aware Atman, which is of the nature of Sat, Chit and Ananda, that gives that proximity of the causal body in deep sleep, gives it enough rest. That's the idea. The same thing happens in deep meditation, where in meditation, what happens is you suppress with the help of the mantra, and then slowly when you meditate, you forget the gross and the subtle consciously, stopping your thoughts for some time and being engrossed on one particular thing. That itself releases a lot of stress, because there is hardly any change in meditation. You are just meditating on one object. So he is never the seen. Adrushto drashta is never the seen. The scene means the seen object, but he is the witness of that scene. Whatever, whether he sees it in a dream or whether he sees it in actual waking state. He is never heard, but he is the hearer. So he is not heard. He is not the heard. He is not the sound that comes out, but he is the witnesser of the sound, just as he is the witnesser of the eyes, of the objects which are seen by the eyes. He is never the thought, but he is the thinker of that thought. Thought is just like an object. It's a subtle object. We are sending thoughts. We are gathering thoughts from outside. We just like our thoughts are being released in the universe. They are like things. They are like subtle things. It's like there is a fire. You burn a fire, and after the fire burns, the smoke still remains. Similarly, our thoughts are something which we release. And once the thoughts leave the human personality, what happens is they leave a trace behind. So that is what the scriptures say. They say that it is futile to trace the origin of consciousness either to the heart or the brain, though our consciousness does not originate in the mind, nor does it originate in the heart. But roughly speaking, they say that the reflection of that pure consciousness as thought is felt in the brain, and as feelings is felt in the heart. That is why we don't say we think from the heart. We feel from the heart when we think from the brain. So the consciousness, which is termed as Atman, which is the witness of everything that we see, which is the sound that it hears, the thought that it thinks, is never known, but it is the knower of all those things. So it is self-existence. And being the purest type of matter, the mind has the capacity to transmit that consciousness. That is why there is a feeling in the material science that thought is itself is consciousness. It may be consciousness compared to the body, which is gross, which is considered to be inert. It may be that the mind is more conscious. That is because it has the purest type of material. So mind itself, according to Vedanta, is of nature of material, though which we cannot perceive, but can be transmitted and exchanged just as the bodily materials, the atoms and the molecules and all, the energy that emits from us, from the sentient or insentient object can be transferred. It can be transferred. So also these thought waves, they are made of subtle matter. They do not belong to the Atman. They just reflect the awareness or the consciousness, pure consciousness, which the Atman is. So it is quite likely, I mean, if you compare the physiology of the scientists and the physiology of Vedanta, they say that from the mind, the radiance of consciousness reaches the bodily organs. So it is possible, because the mental level or the subtle body, or you may say the Manomaya Kosha and the Vijnanamaya Kosha, which we spoke of, the other levels of consciousness being finer, they may influence, just as our prana influences the body. The bodily forces make our body active or dull according to the prana. If a very active man we say he is a very energetic man. That energy is manifest through the body more than a, a dull person who is as good as an inert object. He is reluctant to move because we say the prana is not active. The five pranas which we discussed when we discussed the body. So they vary, and according to their variance, the consciousness seems to be more in a person who is very alert and very active. So it is possible that mind and the heart are the uh, subtle organs through which the bodily organs, the gross body organs, they are connected with because both are connected with the nervous system. So, and as you know, the nervous energy is one of the five pranas, one of the five energies, like our circulation, the body circulation, and then the heartbeat and prana, which results in the breath. So there is this nervous energy, the pure nervous energy, which passes through the spinal cord and our nervous system. So they may use the brain and the heart, or they use the brain and the heart. I'm not talking of the physical heart, the function of which is to pump. This, we refer to this spiritual heart, which is at the center, which is maybe at the center of the spinal column. So, or the spinal cord. So the heart is the seat of feelings, because that is where the sensation of feelings are spread through the organs. A person, if he is intensely emotional, maybe he will start crying, or he may shed tears, or he may laugh, and he may jump for joy. And normally you say the heart is the seat, that part of the spinal cord where these nerve currents are more, can be identified. That is the heart. Whereas for thought, for cognition, for analysis and other functions of the mind, the brain is used more. So there is a study which says in Charaka and Sushruta, in both the medical sciences. Charaka, in fact, is a very standard text on the physiology of the human body, or also the animals and others, where according to even Aristotle in the Greek science, Charaka and Sushruta, they say the heart, that is the central of the spinal column or the spinal cord, the heart center, as we call the center of the heart, not the physical heart. So that is the central organ and is the seat of consciousness, which Vedanta also agrees. That's why they say buddhi comes when you discover your center of consciousness and stabilize the center of consciousness in the heart. But in tantric writings, according to the tantras, that consciousness is transferred to the brain, or rather the whole cerebrospinal system is designed in such a way that these nerve currents, as they gravitate downwards, you feel the body more. As they gravitate upwards, that is why they call different chakras. Chakras are not, they may be identified as spots in our spinal column, but they are more of the seat of consciousness. As we go on feeling the consciousness more and more subtle, our consciousness becomes more and more elevated. They say the nervous energy flows from the bottom of the spine more and more and gets stabilized at higher and higher levels. It starts with the heart, which is the seat of consciousness according to Charaka and Sushruta. And according to the tantras, that goes to the top of the head, or the last portion. It is transferred to the brain or the cerebrospinal system. So the close connection between the brain and the states of consciousness, it is very obvious that people will mistake it for the consciousness. They say it is the brain, you don't need to imagine the idea that there is a spirit independent of the body. But as I said, what happens when the body dies, the same spinal cord is there. everything is as it is. So how does suddenly it become unconscious and it becomes inert, the dead body? So the connection between brain and the different states of consciousness, because they manifest, the higher the state of your consciousness, the more subtle you become, the more evolved you become. So maybe to live an animal life, a life which resembles an animal, doing basic functions, a primitive man, for example, he does not need the consciousness to rise to the level of brain because he hardly uses his brain. So in animals also, you will see there are primitive animals, there are animals with the very, very weak vertebral system where they don't have that cerebrospinal system nicely developed. You will find them doing all the primary tasks of the body, the transformation, growth, everything is there. But they don't exhibit the I exhibit the higher functions of a human being, which can be seen only in evolved human beings. Otherwise, the human being is not very much better than the animals, because many of the functions animals also share with us. In fact, if you see, some of the animals are having sharper ears, better eyesight than us, human beings. They can perceive things which human beings do not do. The dogs do. In fact, they hear the sound. The sense of smell is far better than human beings. So when it comes to the physical body, the center of consciousness, if it is in the lower end of the spinal column, they say we can become excellent. You may say it may be a very crude way to describe a human being as an animal, though the sociologists define human beings as a social animal. They say it's just an animal because there are so many functions which are common between animals. Definitely we are not plants. So that's how they say. For everything they'll say is a social animal. Human beings, they cannot think of a higher evolution of the human being. So he's an animal, but he's a social animal. He mixes much better. He has some rules and regulations. He's slightly more intelligent. He can dominate over other animals. That's the only evolution they accept. So intelligence definitely develops, and as intelligence develops, as the brain develops, the intelligence also develops. The states of consciousness do change when the brain develops. You don't see the same intelligence in a small child and a grown-up person, an adult, because the development of the brain definitely improves that the states of consciousness, the states of perception, his ability to perceive certain things, his ability to think in a different way, that improves with the development of the brain. But it cannot be attributed to the brain only, because we see that any disorder in the brain seriously affects one thinking. Like even in intoxication, for example, there is anesthesia. When you give it delirium, there are so many diseases associated with the brain. We find that it gives some kind of evidence that the consciousness, the relation between the condition of the brain and the state of consciousness are interdependent. But that does not prove that the consciousness is closely associated with the brain. It uses the brain. That is the important difference between science or medical science and Vedanta. They say the consciousness, if it had been, say for example, if it is an outcome of your cerebral process, as some of the scientists claim, as the child grows, then all the thought processes like decision-making capacity, determination, volition, or the development of willpower, and all could be explained purely by environment. So give a better environment, give a better environment, conducive environment to the child, then he should, by his very training, he should have a better choice-making capacity, a better discriminative power to choose what is right and wrong. But very often we see that they don't have. Person may be highly skilled, but he may be always making wrong decisions, and that will land him in trouble. So also determination, deliberation, there are several higher functions for which Vedanta says there is a faculty of higher mind. It's not just the lower mind, which is known as manas. The lower mind can be trained to do certain skills, to develop certain skills. They help better coordination between the mind and the limbs. So you are a skilled worker, you may be skilled even analytically, you can be skilled mathematician, you can be skilled in so many aspects of, you may be a skilled a skilled architect, so you have a wonderful vision, you can use your visual capacity, you can see things far beyond the ordinary person. But that same person, you cannot say that he possesses the same wisdom as a wise person has. He may be a skilled architect, he may be a skilled IT professional because of the skill sets that the lower mind or the manas has developed by constant training. But just by training, of course, by training you can train the higher faculties also. He doesn't become a thoughtful person. He does not become a wise person. He's not able to distinguish between the priorities he has to have in life. He may have totally different, he may be very immature as far as priorities are concerned in life. He may have a very, very crude concept of what spirituality is. As I told you, I referred to one very, without naming that scientist, who once said in the course of, and he was really serious when he said that, and he's an Indian scientist, a very eminent scientist. So when he was asked, what is your views on spirituality? He said, I have outsourced it, because he belonged to the IT sector. So he thought, just as IT knowledge or IT tasks can be outsourced, he says, I have outsourced when we married, we decided, my husband and wife decided, because she was not earning. I said, I will do all the earning for the family and you do the spirituality for the family. You do puja, you do everything. Because he thought, just as IT skills can be outsourced, he said, you do all the spirituality for me. Because according to him, the doing of certain rituals would benefit him. And he earns money, and he thought, just as he can share money, the spiritual values and qualities such as viveka, the decision-making capacity, the choice-making capacity, everything will automatically come to him and can be outsourced to his wife, whose spiritual practices will help him. So you can see how ignorant a person can be. No doubt his skill sets enabled him to be a top professional in his own field. But when it comes to certain characteristics, like doing the right thing at the right time, and we also saw how Duryodhana and Arjuna, a classic example, when Duryodhana is telling Krishna that though we were trained by the same guru, they had the same guru, they were cousins, but something strange I feel. I know what dharma is, because what dharma is, what is to be done and what is not to be done, what is adharma, has been taught to both the Kauravas and Pandavas. He says, I feel helpless. Don't blame me. I have, because of certain things, wrong choices. He was about to die and Krishna asked him. He is blaming Krishna. He said, I know what is adharma, but there is no way I cannot avoid it. I knew what was dharma, but at the same time I could not follow it. So he is attributing, he says, I knew because I definitely know what are the moral values, what I should have done, what I shouldn't have done. That choice-making capacity, that choice was left to me. I could have done it. When there was an option, when the dispute could be peacefully settled, he settled for war rather than peace. So he says, I knew what dharma is, I was doing adharma, but at the same time I could not avoid it. So these capacities, they do not fall under the purview of the lower mind. The lower mind can be skilled, But the thought processes like choice making, which is in Sanskrit known as viveka, the willpower, that is determination to undertake certain tasks which you know is good for you, that comes as a result of higher evolution. So unfortunately, there is no point, as Swami Vivekananda once said, in telling the children what to do, what not to do. Every child knows what he should do, what will cause him harm, but you have to teach him how to do or how not to do. He knows something is not good for him, but his willpower, his determination or his deliberation, the willpower, the volition, and the purpose of life to discriminate between what will give him eternal value, what will give him temporary value for the thing that he does. They are governed, they cannot be governed by physical laws. There is something known as spiritual evolution, which develops these higher faculties. That is exactly, otherwise man would have become a robot or an automaton, because the robot can be designed. There are highly intelligent robots which can do almost all the functions. So there may come a time when they may design a very absolutely skilled robot to do almost every task that possibly the lower mind or the manas can do. But that robot would not, no matter how much we try, it would not have the capacity to take right decisions, to develop qualities of the heart, or to have compassion, all these things when you see. So that freedom of will, or is the mark, the freedom of will, the freedom of taking decisions, which is known as buddhi, belongs to the Vijnanamaya Kosha, the slightly higher mind. So the Vedanta divides the mind, though the mind is connected with the brain and the heart, its functions are different. So there is a lower mind which depends a lot on the body and the nervous system and everything. That is the skill, you may say the skill mind, or you may even say the lower mind or manas. But there is a higher mind which uses this lower mind to do the tasks it should do. What one ought to do, what one should not do, and how not to do. All this willpower, the emotions, the freedom of will, they are not mechanical operations. They are not just skill sets. Of course, you may say you can train the will. So they say, if you constantly exercise your will by using it, by choosing tasks, difficult and more difficult tasks, they say you can increase the willpower to a certain extent. But they are definitely not the product of the environment and the external. There should be some internal impetus that is known as, that is the basic difference between a conscious and a mechanical process. So, this was accepted by many scientists like Bergson, who said that there is a greater, or you may say, there's infinitely more to consciousness than just the brain. A brain may express a limited amount of consciousness, but even scientists like Bergson saw that there are capacities beyond the capacity of the physical brain. The physical brain definitely will help you to monitor and coordinate your limbs better to develop certain skill sets, whether it is physical skills, mental skills, analytical skills. So the brain has certain functions which it can do. It can do many other functions, like mechanically it can produce, it can give an impetus. There are certain chemicals or in the human blood, or certain glands which can be forced to emit certain, to release certain hormones which can change the functions of, that can be done by the mind. That can be, of course, done by, they say the seat of everything is in the brain. But the consciousness or the awareness or the wisdom, the buddhi part of it is far more independent of the physical processes than we imagine. It has to come from a higher source. So now there is another very important task or important point to be discussed before we come to the subtle body. We are now still discussing the connection between the gross body and the Atman or the soul as it is defined in Vedanta. So another common mistake that we make, that thought is definitely a function of the mind, but not of the brain. This is one point which one has to imagine, or not imagine, or because it comes as a hypothesis, it has to be proved. It is an expression of a consciousness through a particular modification of the mind. A particular modification of the mind may take place, and that forces the brain to think and act in a particular way. So, for example, they say in the dream state, the person can think, feel, imagine, though is not conscious of the body. The brain is almost inoperative in such cases, but still you will find that the dream state can be equally real, equally powerful. Some of the people, they get up when they have nightmares, for it takes a while for them to even come back to the normal waking state, because the dream was so powerful, and at that time it appeared to be so real. So it is when the brain is practically, the conscious brain physiologically is very much inoperative, because the senses are not functioning, the eyes are closed, everything when you are sleeping, when you are dreaming, none of these things are operative, but still the feeling or the manifestation of the consciousness, it is definitely there in the waking state, but the manifestation of consciousness in the dream state cannot be explained. So it is the mind in that state, in a dream state, where the external organs which constitute the physical body may not be active. The subtle constituents, when we come to the subtle body, we'll discuss that. The subtle organs behind this external organs, they remain highly active. And it is the mind, or the manomaya kosha and the vijnanamaya kosha, the will, even in dream. For example, somebody was asking the other day, there is an example given by Swami Premeshanandji, who used to teach Raj Yoga. He said, suppose a person is in his dream, he's feeling that he's drowning. So naturally, if he doesn't know how to swim, he may feel that he's dragged down, and he may feel as helpless as he was when he was, if he was to be really drowning in the waking state. But in the dream also, is for by chance, if he sees some human being or on the shore, there is a chance that he will cry for help, and just as in the waking state he would cry for help. And in that, there may be a possibility that that person who is on the shore or on the bank of the river may come to his help, and he may even feel that he is rescued by them. So that shows, that it is not necessary that any bodily connection be there. The organs may be he may be totally lying in a flat position. There's no question of any, but he has imagined a temporary dream world. And indeed, that dream world, he is expecting, or just as he would have expected, somebody to suddenly appear, a desperate person who is drowning. So that is why they say, even in dream, you can be very conscious. So that consciousness is the product of the subtle mind through the subtle organs. So the probability, the Vedanta says, is that the mind that conveys, the so-called mind, which again, as I told you, is divided into two parts, the manas and the buddhi. Manas and the buddhi are two distinct functions. The manas is the reactive mind. And for manas to act, manas, of course, has its subtle aspects and the gross aspects, because the manas has to depend. It's reactive in the sense it depends on the inputs that our sense organs give it, and it reacts. And that kind of mind we share with animals. Animals are absolutely reactive in their nature. If they see a danger, they don't anticipate, or they may have some kind of buddhi which can help them to anticipate. But mostly their minds are reactive. They're less evolved than the human beings. Human beings can be anxious of the future, can think what would happen 25 years ahead of them, and they can even extend. But animals are very short-sighted, and they plan only when there is a danger. Or, for example, they are highly reactive. Their minds are highly reactive. So they have a mind, but the difference between human mind and the animal mind is that the human mind is more evolved because it has a higher faculty, which is known as the buddhi, the discriminative mind, which can think beyond just action and reaction. Action and reaction, even animals exhibit in their lives. If they see a danger, they start to run away. Their organs, the brain gives them instructions to run away. If they feel hungry, they go and eat. All these actions are prompted by thought, a lower or a crude type of mind, which is known as the reactive mind, which has been discussed as manas. So the mind, the higher mind conveys the radiance to the different organs through the brain. If it is the lower mind, it will just be reactive in nature. He will be not more evolved than an animal, maybe slightly more skilled, slightly more manipulative. The human being is just evolving, is developing his buddhi, his wisdom, and the power to make the right choices so that he can live in harmony with others. Otherwise, if he resorts to a purely reactive mind, you will see that person is exhibiting animal characteristics. If he sees danger, he will just quarrel, he will fight. You can see such human beings who don't have the foresight to even think and use their buddhi and pause for a certain time and think, why am I reacting? Why do I get angry so soon? Am I just exhibiting some animal characteristics? Why is my mind so reactive? People don't seem to think that they have these two different or two possibilities. A highly evolved mind will hesitate to just act and react according to the circumstances. It will hold back its decision. It will use its choice making capacity to make the right choice at the right time. In fact, as I said, our whole life, if you see, is a function of our buddhi rather than the reactive mind. It may be highly skilled, it may be highly capable of many things, but one wrong decision can shatter the whole career, the whole life of that person, because the buddhi is not developed. Somehow, equal importance was not given to develop that faculty of the higher faculty of the mind, which can make the right choice. So a right choice made at the wrong time is of no use, or a wrong choice made at the right time also can be dangerous. And with all the skill sets one possesses, if he makes a wrong choice, there is very difficult. It's so difficult to trace one's journey back and go to the point where you made the wrong choice. So that faculty, that higher faculty, though the brain is the vehicle, we need to be as independent of the brain. According to Vedanta, the brain is the transmitter of the thought, which is generated at a higher level of consciousness to the brain, and whatever to the brain, and through the brain to the organs. So it will act according to that. But where is the source of that thought? So the consciousness, slowly we are coming to the conclusion that this consciousness is not always dependent on the body. So there is something known as the plasticity of the brain. So there are certain areas of the brain. Recently, it has been proved that certain portions of the brain, if they are damaged, there would be irreversible damage, and certain functions cannot be done because the very structure of the brain assigns certain characteristics to certain parts of the brain, certain characteristics for sight, for sound, for other things. But the plasticity of the brain, a great portion of the brain can be damaged. But those functions, by training or even by some kind of willpower, it has been shown in the scientists have shown, neuroscientists have shown that other parts of the brain can take those functions. So that is one more argument in favor of having an extra, shifting the location and not making consciousness totally consciousness, and the reflection of the consciousness totally dependent on the organ known as brain. So there are instances where with the consciousness and the functions have been shown to be working perfectly, even if a large portion of the brain has been damaged. So this much. Correct. So it till now we have seen that though the brain may be an instrument to transmit the thoughts that are generated by our mental self, or the Vijnanamaya Kosha, or the higher mind, the discriminative self, the lack of capacity of the brain will not stop a person from growing. That is the idea. So then the question comes, where is the so-called self or the Atman located in the body? Does it have a location in the physical body? If it is just the reflected consciousness that we see either in the body, in the organs, in the lower mind, and the higher mind, which is known as the buddhi. And as Vedanta explains, the higher the evolution of a human being, the more his buddhi will be developed. So there will be more of reflection of that consciousness. Not that the consciousness is same in all. It's a all pervasive thing, Atman or the Brahman or whatever name you give it. Vedanta says that consciousness doesn't change. It's only its reflection. So according to its reflection through our psychophysical system, if it reflects more, we call him an intelligent person or a spiritual person. If it reflects less, we call him more closer to animals, because he's more gross in his actions, more material in his behavior or interaction with others. And definitely, history has shown that there are people who identify more with the spirit than this consciousness than with the body. So that is what gives them the title, or maybe they are classified as spiritual people. When Jesus said, "My kingdom is the kingdom of the spirit," he otherwise he would not have just laughed at the crucifixion. He was, even at that stage, he could tell that, please forgive those people, because they don't know, they ignorantly they think I am that body, and by destroying the body. There is that story of Alexander, who knew that there were very great wise men. Swami Vivekananda quotes this story. And he finds a monk who was sitting on the rock, and he knew, because people told him he's supposed to be a very wise man and a very enlightened soul. So Alexander was very keen. By his power, he wanted to somehow take him to Greece so that the Greek civilization can learn something. But these people could not be forced. So Swamiji says it's a very famous incident when he sent his soldiers. He said, our emperor wants you to come with him. Of course, they took away many intelligent people. You can find in the court of the Greek rulers some of the intelligent people who were convinced or forced to go. But if a person believes in the superiority of the spirit, even the threat of death does not work. So, as the story goes, as the incident is explained, they went and threatened this monk. He said, he has given an order, you have to go. He said, you do whatever you like, I'm not going to go. They even said, we'll kill you. He said, then he gave a very big laugh. And then They say Alexander said, leave him alone, because he said, what a foolish person you are. You think by killing the body you can kill me. Because if one is aware of the temporary nature of the gross existence, that is how as you become more and more dependent, or as you identify more and more with the higher states of your consciousness, the less dependent you are on the transformation that takes place in the body. We see Sri Ramakrishna's own life when he was suffering from excruciating pain. It was Swami Turiyananji who said, I can see that kind of strange joy in you. You don't seem to be suffering like other people. So then Sri Ramakrishna was very much pleased. He said, oh, you could see that. I mean, you discovered me. So he was just trying to test Turiyananji by saying, see, I have so much of pain. And can you do? He said, no, you may try to fool us, but we know that your mind is absolutely disconnected. As we discussed in the previous life, the spiritual person aims to get rid of the feeling that he's the body or he's even associated with the mind through yoga. Yoga exactly means that identification of the Purusha which we have lost, and we become identified with Prakriti, which is of the nature of change. And how to do it, that process is known as yoga. And that happens as, I'll quickly conclude, that normally the nerve currents are forced to flow through the Ida and Pingala, the two spinal nerves which are attached to each other. But physiologically, if you see, there is a hollow. If you cut open the cross section, you will find a small hollow which is known as Sushumna. Though medical scientists do not ascribe any function to that, except that there is a cerebral spinal fluid which protects the spinal cord from being damaged. They say that's the only function. Maybe it transmits certain things, but beyond that, they say it is, we do not know why there is a hollow. The idea is that the nerve currents, as long as they are, the yogis believe, if you read Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, the nerve currents normal in a normal person flows through this left efferent and efferent nerves, which are joined together. And that makes him totally a slave to the sensations of his body, the mind, the different stages and the different states of the mind, depression, anxiety, worry, and all those things. But how to disassociate with that? How can one make the nerve currents flow through the hollow? It is like a very crude example, that if electricity flows through a wire, if there is some break in the wire somewhere, then the electricity doesn't flow. But if it is transmitted through wireless, you don't require a medium to transfer data or whatever it is. Then wireless becomes absolutely smooth unless there are certain disturbances. So exactly in the same way, Swamiji explains in his Raj Yoga, when the human being forces through certain practices known as yoga, the Ashtanga Yoga, he makes this nervous energy flows through the hollow of the spinal cord. More and more, the more and more he does that through certain techniques which are described, like meditation, prayer, and all those things, he feels that he is less and less dependent on the gross and also the mind. That is the secret of his happiness, because he does not that he doesn't have anxiety. He has a body, so the body will be subject to all the transformations which any other human body has. But he can detach himself from that. The only way to detach is make the nervous energy pass through the hollow. So it doesn't require a wire to transmit nervous energy. It becomes like a wireless system. That is a crude way of saying, but that is how yoga works. Yoga says that the goal of, they give it different names. Tantra say it is Kundalini, and people think it is something mysterious, or this Kundalini and snake and all those things. But there is nothing, it is just symbolic, the snake and all those things. Kundalini just means the ability of a person to be as independent of the body and the mind and the bodily states and the mental states which are ever changing, and anything that changes, anything that increases or decreases make you sorrow, make you feel sorrow or make you feel depressed. So to how to detach? So why do people meditate? They say to get some peace. But if one meditates rightly, what happens according to yoga is he makes that nerve currents, the subtle nerve currents, flow through the hollow. And when it happens, he feels that he is more of a spirit than the body. So he feels that he is identified with the consciousness. Right now, his consciousness is reflected. If it is reflected more in the body, he is very gross person. He suffers a lot. If he somehow manages to, through his reading, through his intellectual pursuits, if he uses more of his mind than the body, then he graduates from pure animal level to a slightly better human being. But still he feels anxiety, depression, and many other mental ailments, which naturally, when you identify the consciousness with the mind, with the ups and downs of the mind, you feel happy or sorrow. But if you even detach from that, which is the goal of yoga, which is the goal of Vedanta, like Buddha, like Christ, and like all the people who have succeeded in totally separating the Purusha and the Prakriti, the pure consciousness and the whole of nature. So you see nature as a witness, and you identify yourself with a pure awareness. So that where is the location of that self? In the body. That state, of course, when you totally disassociate, you have nothing to do with the body, and that is the state of samadhi, which you find in Sri Ramakrishna's life. The doctor desperately tried to find out what has happened to the prana, the pulses, everything stopped. And they thought he's practically dead. Even felt the heartbeat, the eye pupils, everything seemed to come to a total standstill. So that was the state in which he could succeed in totally detaching the pure consciousness with Prakriti. And that is the state of joy, or that is the ultimate state where you identify with the self. That is self-realization. But it is so rare that some element of connection always remains, no matter how evolved a person is. If he's having that samadhi according to yoga, there is no problem. But to attain that state, all the techniques that are used, whether you use yoga, whether you use Vedanta, whether you follow some other path, the path of bhakti, through controlling of your emotions, these are different paths, but the goal is same. So to find out the location of the self, a starting point in our physical body from where we can enter the world of consciousness is the goal of Upanishad. So the Chandogya Upanishad calls this body as the Brahmapuram, where Brahma resides. So we'll come to that in our next class, because just as it is explained figuratively, just as there is a king in a big kingdom, and he has all these different gates and other things. So this consciousness is located, though it is all pervasive, in the body. It has a particular location through which you can touch that infinite consciousness. So we'll come to that aspect in the next class. If there are some questions. The chat is. No, it's fine.
Describe the both mind and intellect.
Yeah. Yeah.
But how about the unconscious part of it, the chitta and
yeah. I'll come to that when we discuss the causal body. The so-called unconscious, as the Westerners understand it, and the so-called unconsciousness as Vedanta describes, they're totally different. That unconsciousness is known as samskaras, or they are inherent tendencies which have their location in the chitta, which is supposed to be another aspect of the mind. I told you about the reactive mind, manas, the discriminative mind, buddhi, which is finer than manas, which takes the decisions, choices, makes choices. And then we have other two aspects of the mind. One is chitta, which is the receptacle of all our past thoughts. You may say it is fossilized thought. They are there, but they have the capacity to become thoughts. So whether you call it unconscious, our concept, our unconscious, which is spoken of, is just suppressed thoughts. They are not unconscious of which resides in the causal body. As I said, there is a subtle body where our mind. So a thought when the mind thinks. It's like a small bubble in the bottom of a vessel. When it comes up, you understand. When it just starts, the bubble starts from the bottom. If there is some, you must have seen the bubbles coming up. When they come up, they burst outside. So these thoughts are deeply embedded in our consciousness. It's only when they come to the surface we can identify the thoughts, we can watch those thoughts, and we can feel those thoughts, and we know that we are angry, but there may be this hidden anger or hidden all the other things which we are not aware of, which are there. So they call it, according to Freud, they are in the unconscious. But their unconscious is something which external stimulus can immediately arouse in a person. So that's a superficial, you can call it subconscious. Whether you call it unconscious can mean there is no consciousness at all. But a better word is subconscious. It has not become conscious because it is there. And how do you know? According to Freud, you can study your dreams, because consciously you are not thinking those thoughts because you know they are bad. But in dream, there is no willpower, literally. So you can dream anything. So it normally expresses in the dream, but they are not coherent. And because there is that will becomes a bit weak. So in dream, you can see fantastic things which reflect to a certain extent your subconscious mind. But Vedanta goes deeper and say in the samskaras which is the result of not only this life, but several lives. You carry that same chitta from one birth to another. And when it gets, that is why you see Valmiki was a robber, but he had a huge storehouse of a saint, of samskaras of a saint. It just needed one spark. He left his family. When the family said, we are not sharing the sins that you're doing it is your job. So he gets disgusted, and that changes his whole life. And he becomes a saint. So you may ask, where were those wonderful thoughts? They were in the unconscious, they were in the causal body, but it required a particular stage. And after he worked out his karma, it came out. So that's the idea. Our idea of unconscious is far deeper than the Western idea. They are there, but it requires, some people will say, divine intervention. Like Narada came and just Tulsidas also, same thing happened. He was so attached to his wife. Overnight, he just gave up his family and became a saint. So these deep samskaras, good or bad, it can be bad also. Sometimes it can, person from a positive, following a positive course of life, suddenly can become negative and suddenly can become evil, the vice versa. So that is according to Vedanta. We'll come to that in the subsequent class, where the structure of the causal body is discussed. It's not very easy. It's not very easy to even detect unless one has that capacity. Only avatars, some exceptionally spiritual people like Sri Ramakrishna could do that. Buddha, they could see the future. They could see the potential of somebody who apparently till that point in his life was not exhibiting those qualities. But they could see that this person has a potential of a saint. That is only if they can touch the subconscious or the chitta, where they are like it is there deep in the storage, but you need something to bring it out. What is that? Close. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Harihi Om Tat Sat Shri Ram.